थैंक यू मिस्टर मेहता। दुनिया के सबसे विख्यात अर्थशास्त्री चाणक्य ने कहा था कि एक गज यानी हाथी को देखो जिसे महावत की एक छोटी सी छड़ी वश में कर लेती है, और एक छोटा सा दिया काले अंधकार को दूर कर देता है, और एक मामूली हथौड़ी एक विशाल पर्वत को तोड़ सकती है। क्या उस छड़ी, उस दिए या उस हथौड़ी के आकार की तुलना गज से, दूर तक फैले अंधकार से या पर्वत से की जा सकती है? पर फिर भी उनका योगदान कितना ज्यादा है। जरूरी नहीं कि आपका आकार बड़ा हो, जरूरी यह है कि आपका प्रभाव कितना है। Small businesses are the backbone of the Indian economy, and these small businesses are the building blocks that will take our economy to $1 trillion in the next few years. Joining us are Professor Krishnamurthy Subramanian, Chief Economic Advisor, Government of India, and Mr. Raghava Rao, Vice President Finance and India CFO, Amazon India, to talk about how these small businesses will shape India's economic growth.
Welcome everyone. Welcome to day 2 of Amazon Sambhav. I hope all of you had a great time listening in into the conversations and discussions that we had on day 1. It's my privilege and honor to start day 2 with a discussion with Mr. Krishnamurthy Subramanian, who's a Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of India. I'm going to call him Subbu during this conversation. Thanks Subbu. Thank you for accepting the invite to be a part of Amazon Sambhav. We look forward to having a conversation with you and hearing your views about topics ranging from digitization to small and medium businesses and the partnership between different elements in the ecosystem in India, and also what is the role that technology, etc., can play in accelerating our economic growth. So over to you, Mr. Subramaniam. If I could start with a simple question. You are the architect of the paper, The Economic Survey in 2019, which talked about moving India's economy to about 5 trillion by 24-25. It talked about the number of factors that would get us to this particular vision. Could you tell us what your thoughts are on the role that small and medium enterprises play in getting India to a 5 trillion economy by 25?
Thank you, Raghav, and thanks for inviting me to share my thoughts at Amazon Sambhav. I think the small and medium enterprises play a very important role, not only in the contribution that they make to GDP growth in the economy, but also in creating jobs, both in the formal and the informal sectors. For instance, an empirical piece of evidence that we had highlighted in this particular chapter on dwarfism in the Indian manufacturing area. What we had shown is that if you take a small and medium enterprise in the United States, by the time the firm is 30 years old, it has created almost 7 times as many jobs as it had created in its first 5 years of existence. If you look at the same statistic for India, the average 30-year-old firm had created only 40% more jobs compared to what it had created in the first 5 years of its inception. In other words, the typical firm in the United States was creating 5 times as many jobs in the organized sector. Now, when you accumulate that across all the small and medium enterprises, you actually see the enormous potential that exists for job creation in the organized sector, with small and medium enterprises. So I think it is extremely critical that our, the owners and promoters of the small and medium enterprises realize that when they grow the firm, not only are they first benefiting themselves, after all, the profits from a 1,000 crore turnover is actually much higher than from a 100 crore turnover. But more importantly, they're also, contributing to the nation, creating jobs in the organized sector and contributing to GDP growth. So it's a complete win-win where they actually are doing well for themselves, but also contributing to the nation.
Thanks. I think you make a very important point that small and medium businesses don't remain small and medium businesses. Over their lifespan, they actually grow into large enterprises. And that's something that I think our country looks forward to. So Subbu, if I could take you to another point, Your paper also talks about increasing the share of small and medium businesses in India's economy from about 30% today to about 50%. Would love to hear your thoughts on what do you think is going to unlock the expansion in the role of small and medium businesses in achieving this vision for growth.
So, Raghav, as I was mentioning, one of the problems is that our firms, age, but they don't grow in the process, and that is why we termed this phenomenon dwarfism. Now, apart from the mindset of the promoters itself, and their a move towards a more visionary mindset would be certainly helpful. But government laws and regulations have also played their role in creating perverse incentives for firms to remain small. For instance, if you take the labor laws, that had existed earlier. If a firm had more than 100 employees, it had to comply with all kinds of rules and regulations, in complying with the labor laws. So the natural response of a promoter used to be, once the firm had reached, let's say, 95 employees, he or she would think about creating a firm in the spouse's name, and then maybe brother-in-law or sister-in-law's name, and possibly even in the driver's name. Now, compared to the situation where this firm grows from 95 employees to maybe 500 employees, when you have 5 firms, each of which have about 100 employees, that's in that setup you don't generate economies of scale, and economies of scale are extremely important for costs to go down, which in turn helps the firm to compete well not only in domestic markets but particularly in international markets, which are far more competitive. And so by creating these perverse incentives for firms to remain small, I think laws and regulations were not helping. Here's where I think the changes that we have brought in over the last couple of years are, I think, quite salient. And there are 3 particular ones that I would mention. First, of course, the labor law changes, where we have now taken what were more than 40 odd laws governing the labor relationship, brought it down to just 4 codes. The number of sections have been reduced by 2/3. The number of minimum wages that employers had to comply with have been decreased from about 2,300 to 40. And as a result of the much reduced compliance, some of these perverse incentives would go away. Secondly, we've changed the definitions of MSMEs, so that firms can grow without the fear of losing some of the benefits that governments provide, and thereby these perverse incentives are removed. Finally, the export incentive scheme, the production linked incentives scheme, PLI, has also been tailored to provide incentives for growth. The earlier situation used to be one where there were no incentives for growth. That has been changed. So when you look at together all these, and add to that the compliance burden going down with the ease of doing business, for instance, from being ranked about 130s, 140s in the world, now we are ranked 62. So together all of these, I think, will reduce these perverse incentives. But I must reiterate that the promoters also must focus on growing their own firm for their own good and for the good of the nation.
Thanks, sir. That's quite helpful. You covered the role of the government in simplifying regulations and simplifying incentives so that they don't hold back the share of or the growth of small and medium businesses. I was just keen to know, what are your views on technology? We at Amazon think of technology as an enabler that will help small and medium businesses grow larger in scale and serve their customers better, and also expand the ecosystem of small and medium businesses. So keen to hear your views on what technology can do, especially in this era when so much seems possible with all the computing power that we have.
Raghav, I think it would be very natural for me to think that technology is a great enabler for productivity gains. After all, like you, I also cut my teeth, in academia as an engineer, learning technology. I think it is particularly important for small and medium enterprises to benefit from technology. There's research by people at Stanford, for instance, who have shown that simple things like inventory management technology, ways in which you actually can manage the production floor much more efficiently, those can make a big improvement, in productivity of small and medium enterprises. None of which is rocket science, just simple things. But But if you add to that the benefits that can come from using analytics to be able to get a better sense of, for instance, the demand conditions and the overall labor market conditions, etc. I think the small and medium enterprises can benefit substantially from from use of technology. And I think it must be mentioned that for the benefit of SMEs, that we're not talking about very complicated technologies. These are very simple technologies as well that that SMEs can really benefit from. But I think it behooves on the entrepreneurs to embrace technology, understand it, and if need be, seek expert guidance from firms like Amazon. And I think large firms can play a very important role in mentoring some of these small and medium enterprises in actually upgrading them on the technological side. But I think there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that there are enormous gains to be reaped from embracing technology.
Let me pick up the last point that you said. You said large firms can help some of the small and medium businesses to embrace technology and perhaps grow in size and scale. Could you talk a little bit more about it and tell us your views of what you see, and what could a partnership between a large company and a small and medium business look like, and how could it be a win-win partnership that would shape India's economic growth?
So Raghav, I would actually use this parallel of corporate venture capital. Some of my early research when I was doing my PhD was in this area. So if you take just to take an example, a Dell Ventures or an Intel Ventures, they themselves, they provide funding to to the startups to encourage innovation. Now, I'm going to use that parallel to talk about the role that companies like Amazon and others, large firms, can play in really equipping SMEs in this sphere. And here I think it's important to realize that some of these investments in technology requires upfront investment. So that's why the parallel to corporate venture capital is quite apt, because firstly, I think the Amazons of the world can provide some initial funding, seed funding, and maybe in a staged manner, much like venture capital provides. But at the same time, also mentor them on what are the kind of technologies that can be implemented. So once the the funding is provided and what to do is also explained to the small and medium enterprises, I don't think there would be any reluctance on the part of of these SMEs, because given the scale that they are oftentimes the fixed cost of actually making the investment is a big inhibitor. And I think that's where the funding together with what to do can, I think, be quite a critical role. In return for that, I think the Amazons and the large firms will get benefits, because the productivity gains that will come, some of those will get shared as you as a customer to these small and medium enterprises will get those gains. I think that is important. So this is especially important because these small and medium enterprises particularly face working capital crunch. Cash flows are what actually are most critical for these companies. So relatedly, if large firms can really be much more lenient in their working capital cycle with small firms, not squeeze the large firms to the last dime in terms of the working capital or the accounts payable, for instance, I think that can play a huge role. So why not, for instance, have maybe if it is a small firm, pay on cash or maybe 15-day cycle, for instance. With other large firms, when you're doing B2B transactions, obviously you can keep 45 days or 60 days as your accounts payable. But with small firms, if you keep it at maybe a week or 15 days, that can really ease the cycle, provide them the cash flows. Apart from that, when you give them the investment, I think they'll be more than happy to actually invest in technology. After all, the promoter also wants to actually grow his firm. And once you remove some of these constraints, I think they will be more than happy to take up this initiative.
Yeah, in fact, at Amazon, I just wanted to add to your response. We do take that as a responsibility as well as a challenge to help digitize and help small and medium businesses grow by infusing them with technology. We do, for example, digitize their catalogs, train people so that they can come and sell online. We're also aware that access to customers is a significant challenge for them, and the e-commerce marketplace helps them helps to connect small and medium businesses with customers everywhere. In fact, we do have an ambition that by the next few years, we will digitize and bring online as many as 10 million small and medium businesses in this particular country to help us work with the government on achieving this particular vision. So, on that note, Subbu, I just wanted to ask you another related question. You often talked about moving India from a services-based economy, which I guess it is today, with the lion's share of our economy being accounted for by services, into a creator-based economy. Can you talk a little bit more about it? What does it mean? How do we move up that particular value chain? And what's your vision of moving India from a services-based economy to a creator economy?
Having worked for some time in software before I actually went for my MBA and then a PhD, one of the things that I've observed, Raghav, is that a lot of Indian firms, especially in IT, ITES sector, for instance, work on products that international firms bring out. And I think so it's these international firms that are creating these products, but I think the Indian firms can also be creators as much. They can certainly provide those services, but I think just ramping up on that value chain from being a service provider to a product creator, I think will really enable our companies to be able to also generate greater value added. And that is something where I think the talent indeed exists. What is required is for some complementarity to be brought in terms of product design, thinking about actually product marketing, aspects like that. Some of the softer aspects of the product design and marketing, which I think, over the last 10-20 years, India, and Indian entrepreneurs have actually really become very good at as well. So I think that would be something that is the next step for the Indian entrepreneurs to really move towards. Related to that, I also want to actually emphasize the key role of innovation and basic research and development in enabling this process, because without innovation, without basic R&D, it's hard to really master this process of actually creating products. And here, in this year's economic survey, in the chapter on innovation, we highlighted that if you look at the contribution to gross expenditure on research and development, Indian private sector contributes less than a half of what the advanced economy firms in the advanced economies do. In contrast, the public sector and therefore a bulk of it, the government, makes a significant contribution. I think here's where private sector needs to actually have a change in mindset. Eventually, the benefits of innovation will come to the private sector, but it does require a long-run vision. I think that is absolutely sine qua non if the private sector actually has to move from a service-based to a more creator-based economy.
You spoke about innovation. Innovation goes hand in hand with entrepreneurship. You also used the phrase grassroots entrepreneurship in some of your conversations and discussions earlier. Can you talk to us about what exactly do you mean by grassroots entrepreneurship, and how does this sort of go hand in hand with the skills and capabilities that small and medium businesses need to build to be able to grow further? We'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
So, Raghav, this was the analysis that we did in a chapter last year. This was a second chapter in last year's economic survey, entrepreneurship and wealth creation at the grassroots. What we had done was we had actually collected data on new firm creation using the Ministry of Corporate Affairs data and World Bank data as well, across 500 districts in India. Now, when we typically think about entrepreneurship, we think about cities like Bangalore, Hyderabad, Bombay, Delhi, and that's where entrepreneurship is. That is certainly the case. There is actually a greater share there. But I think what is also important to understand is that if you pick up, and if you go and look at that chapter, there's an India map that's been provided there showing the presence of entrepreneurship across these 500 districts. And that map actually does not just look dense in the in the metropolitan areas or the 5 metros, but it actually spread out very well. So there are new firms being created across the geography in India, and that's the point we were making about grassroots entrepreneurship. A key fact that or two facts that must be kept in mind here is one, from the period 2014 to 2018, and this is using World Bank data, what we saw was that the rate of new firm creation was about 13%, 12.8% to be precise. This is multiples of the growth rate of 3.8% that prevailed from 2004 to 2014. So clearly rate of entrepreneurship has gone up significantly. But what is even more heartening is the fact that now India has over 100 unicorns, and these are all unicorns that have been created just by the sheer merit of the idea, not because of the connections, be it political or otherwise, not because of dynastic succession, but just the sheer merit of the idea. And I think there can't be anything more heartening, for all of us, but especially policymakers like us. If you would recall, in last year's economic survey, we'd also written a chapter on, the distinction between crony pro-crony economy versus pro-business economy. I think this is possibly the best illustration of an economy that has moved away from pro-crony to more pro-business. These 100 unicorns just based on the quality of the idea. I think that is indicative of the entrepreneurship that is happening, both at the grassroots, but also, in the large cities, the big ones. And they're also creating significant jobs. And I think all of us see this on a daily basis. When a person comes from Swiggy to deliver food to us, or we're actually taking a Uber cab, those are all actually indications anecdotally of the jobs that they're creating. So they're playing a very, very big role, grassroots entrepreneurship. Last point that I want to mention, last point here is that, if you look at the impact of entrepreneurship on the district level GDP growth itself, a 10% increase in entrepreneurship at the district level translates into about 2% increase in the GDP growth too. So again, consistent with what we've been talking about, job creation, GDP growth, and entrepreneurs play a very critical role in this, and the data bears it out.
Let's talk about a related area of global supply chains. When we often hear the word small and medium businesses, it's sometimes a little hard to visualize how they will integrate with global supply chains. We are, of course, also bolstering India's domestic manufacturing. We often hear about vocal for local, etc. I wanted to hear your thoughts if small and medium businesses have to reach out to customers globally and compete with other firms. They probably have to integrate and be a part of global supply chains. How do you visualize this process taking shape? And specifically, what do you think is the role of e-commerce in enabling small and medium businesses to be a part of global supply chains and serve customers outside of India and not just India?
So Raghav, on this specific aspect of integrating with global value chains, we had written a chapter in the last year's economic survey on the potential there is in network products. These are, the sectors are called network products because they're basically part of networks of global value chains that spread across countries. And I think a key aspect that promoters and entrepreneurs must take into account is, if you look at the two countries that have grown via exports in the last 50 odd years, Japan and China, and if you look at some of the East Asian economies as well, one fact that stands out very clearly is that they first learned to walk before they ran. And what I mean by that is they actually, in almost all cases, they started out by assembling, in particular sectors, and then integrated backwards and forwards in the value chain. And I think the automobile sector in India is a brilliant example of that. The electronic sector now is also another example. If you take the automobile sector itself, and because a lot of it, activity is in South India, I'm sure you'll relate to it. And Suzuki started assembling, and the Maruti started assembling Suzuki components for the Maruti car. Initially, it was only doing assembly, but later the entire sector grew with a lot of small and medium enterprises, contributing in the ancillary sectors, and that led to a mushrooming of SMEs in this space, and them producing components that are actually of world class, and thereby being able to export it to different countries as well. I think there are important learnings here. There are two key learnings that I want to point out. One, that for a labor-intensive economy like ours, I think companies must be looking at the potential that exists, and we've actually talked about that potential, to contribute to the $5 trillion economy. Those who are interested can take a look at that chapter for details. But I think that is something that the companies have to look at first. Look to assemble in India as well. There is nothing wrong about that. If you take the example of iPhone as well, assembling in China, you take small per unit value added, but multiply it by huge scale, you get very large value added. So that's the first lesson. But the second lesson also is, for the SMEs to actually focus on becoming globally competitive. I think that is extremely critical. If they have to go and compete in the international markets, when we import something only because, either we get a higher quality at the same price, or same quality at a lower price. The same aspect applies for our companies as well. So they have to become competitive, and I think this is where the idea of self-reliance, Atmanirbhar Bharat, is extremely critical, because if you show me a self-reliant individual, I will show you a capable individual. If you show me a self-reliant company, I will show you a capable company. And I think the same is true for countries as well. But those capabilities, that lead to self-reliance are built through competition. And I think our SMEs have to recognize that, make themselves capable so that they can rely on themselves to go and compete in the global markets, export, and thereby benefit themselves and the nation.
Yeah, at Amazon, we think of ourselves also as partners to Atmanirbhar Bharat. We do have a program called Launchpad, which, for example, helps startups, especially on the manufacturing side, which have come up with innovative products, to sort of showcase them on our marketplace and to help them reach out to customers. At the same time, we have an export program, which has a very ambitious goal by 2025 to cumulatively deliver about $5 billion of India's exports, connecting the small and medium enterprise to customers across the world who probably shop on Amazon. I wanted to ask you for your thoughts on what you said in the recent economic survey, where you talked about in 2021 about saving lives and livelihoods. You made a very pertinent point in explaining the dilemma that the government had faced in grappling with the pandemic, saying that if lives are lost, they can never be recovered. But if livelihood is lost, it can be recovered over a period of time. With that as context, I wanted to get your thoughts on how do you see the economy recovering, and specifically, what is the role that e-commerce and small and medium businesses can play a role from now onwards in getting the economy to rebound and recover?
Raghav, on the saving lives and livelihoods, we were driven by this simple goal of saving lives, through the pandemic. If you read the Mahabharata, there is this objective very clearly mentioned: Apadi prana rakshahi dharmasya pratham ankuraha. Apada, in which is obstacle or difficulty. Saving a life that is in jeopardy is the origin of dharma. The essence of that dharma was to actually save lives, which is what the government focused on at the start of the pandemic. Now that we're actually have sort of emerged from there, there is a second wave, and I think people should therefore be careful about it and follow all the regulations. But I think overall, compared to the previous episode, we are in a better shape because the vaccine is already out there, and vaccination drives are proceeding. So I think the uncertainty is much lower. One key thing that has stood out, during this entire pandemic is the role of e-commerce and digitization, something that India has really embraced, And I think the most the most salient example of this is, if you take the way in which essentials were provided to almost 800 million people in India, we did that through the public distribution system and through the use of the Jan Dhan Aadhaar mobile. Let me just contrast this to what the most advanced economy in the world, the United States, did. They had to first physically print out checks, get all those checks signed by the president, put it in envelopes, mail it through the United States Post Office. People received these checks, went and deposited those checks in bank ATMs, and then had to withdraw that cash. A process that took 45 days to 2 months, which India did it at the click of a button. I think that illustrates actually the embracing of digital technologies that India has done, not only in the private sector but in the government. If you look at digital transactions itself, they've grown significantly. Even for instance, in transport, etc. Now, a lot more digital technologies is being used. The GST platform, really uses a lot of analytics to track down taxes. So I think the Indian economy is really equipped very well to usher in the significant growth that is happening in e-commerce. And I would also want to highlight again, for the benefit of of the participants, something that we wrote about in the 2018-19 survey, viewing data as a public good, of the people, by the people, for the people. And I think that is an area where public-private partnerships can be really critical. The value-added data that can actually be generated by these public-private partnerships can be useful in healthcare, finance, trade, trade credit, you name it, the kind of sectors that can be, and technologies like blockchain, etc. I think are also very, very important, in really pushing better data, while at the same time taking care of all the privacy protocols. So I think India is among the leading economies in terms of embracing this change, and I think India, will definitely benefit from this change that has been brought by the COVID pandemic.
One of the big challenges that small and medium businesses face is access to high quality people talent. So what do you think is the role of technology, e-commerce, and some of the larger companies in unlocking this particular constraint, that I am a small and medium business, but I don't really get to employ high quality people? How do we think of upskilling? What are your thoughts and views about leveraging people resources so that small and medium businesses can unlock their growth potential?
Raghav, I think this is a very good question. So there is this feeling sometimes that that the quality of skill is not as good, and sometimes I hear this that oh, you policymakers talk about labor intensive and the labor as an advantage, but once you adjust for skill, the advantage goes away. My response to that is that skill of the employees is endogenous, and this is where the employer has to actually, take that as part of, the mandate in upskilling employees, in training employees. And here I think, the combination of large firms together with some of the edu-tech, I think can play a critical role in really enabling, skilling and upskilling, reskilling in the small and medium enterprises. So building on this idea that we discussed earlier about, a corporate venture capital kind of thing being done by, the Amazons of the world and other companies, what may be really useful is if there are ventures that are created by large companies which are specialized, to skilling the small and medium enterprises that work with them, that can leverage edu-tech. Not only that, employees, that are part of these large firms, some of them can actually be training, but at the same time can also be part of train the trainer, kind of initiatives, create, videos, and thereby really focus on, sort of not doing in a sporadic manner, but create an organizational structure, and through, for instance, these quote unquote corporate venture capital kind of, vehicles to really skill the SMEs. And I think the benefits will be reaped both by the small companies and the large companies in this process. I think what is, in all these initiatives, what is really important is a certain long long run vision, of both the small and the medium enterprises. Investments that you make like these will not give you rewards in 6 months, 1 year, or 1.5 years, or 2 years. You have to be patient. These kind of initiatives will give you substantial rewards, but will give you rewards after maybe 2.5, 3 years. But you have to have that patience. I think quarter se quarter tak cannot actually, that mentality cannot really enable you to sort of invest in these long run initiatives. I mean, it's like I use this horticultural parallel to explain this. If you want to grow spinach, you can put those seeds, the spinach crop comes up in 2 weeks, but the crop also remains for just 4 weeks. But if you want to grow a coconut plantation, then you have to actually tend to it, water it for 7, 8, 10 years, and then it gives you crops for 30 years. So I think small and medium enterprises and the large companies must be looking to grow coconut plantations in the area of upskilling, reskilling, and skilling itself.
Thank you, Subbu. Thank you for your time in speaking to us on this day of Amazon Sambhav. It's been an absolute pleasure to listen to your views and thoughts on how small and medium businesses can grow India's economy. We now stay tuned for the other parts of the program on day 2 of Amazon Sambhav. Thank you very much for being with me for this part of the discussion.